one of my earliest soccer coaches in my youth said something pretty profound to me that I didn't really think about until years later. And that was that a good coach is a good thief. So if you have the ability to look at something analytically or critically and think that that's going to positively increase something, or a drill that works really well, then steal it and use it, make it your own.
Welcome to the Talking Shop podcast, where I'm here to share stories, lessons, and experiences in sports performance and professional development. I'm your host, Matt Tomitz, and I'm joined today by Michael Woody. Wood, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, mate. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. Always a good day when I can record a podcast, catch up with friends. And Woody and I have been trying to schedule this podcast this is try number 3 or 4, something like that, but we are making it happen. And a little bit of background about how he and I know each other. When I got to TCU, he is your title, how could I have forgotten? You are a strength and conditioning coach, and then you also do some sports science things for TCU athletics. And you've been there for how many years?
2013, I started as an intern.
Fantastic. So 7 years-ish, depending on beginning, end of the year, whatever. So I got to TCU for my master's 2 years ago, and then I started working with some sports teams. We kind of crossed paths, kind of meshed. We've had a lot of office talks where I would just shoot him a text, say, how does your week look? And he says, hey, mate, I got, an hour on Wednesday. And I would just, walk over across the street from my building, just chat about anything and everything. I've really enjoyed our chats and your friendship, and I'm excited to share your stories, lessons, experiences with everyone else. So for those who are not familiar, can you please share a little bit about your background?
Sure. So if you hadn't picked up already, I'm from England. I came over to America in 2007. My background is I was a goalkeeper. I played soccer. Left school when I was 16 to try and pursue a career in professional soccer, football. I was lucky enough to play youth team soccer for a couple of different professional teams. Went on trial at another Premier League team at the time. Obviously that didn't pan out, that didn't work out. I've been coaching for as long as I can remember, even when I was kind of 15, 16, 17, and still trying to develop my craft of being a goalkeeper. I would still be coaching as well. So I would be helping out my goalkeeper coach with his training sessions and camps and things like that. So I've kind of had coaching in my life in some regard for as long as I can remember. And so when I was kind of 18, 19, I had an injury happen. I was training and trying to compete for a contract at my local professional team. And I basically fractured the sesamoid bone in your toe. And so for those of you that don't know what that is, and I hope I'm not going to butcher this because I'm not like an orthopedic surgeon or anything, you have 2 floating bones on the ball of your foot that basically float in the tendon, and they help with the pivot mechanism of your big toe. So I was training one day with the team, and I kind of just pushed off. And all of a sudden I felt this like burning pain, like all of a sudden, like nothing I'd ever felt before. And it was pretty bad. And so I tried to get through the rest of the training session because no pain, no gain and all that other stuff, grind, And basically, long story short, what ended up happening was I fractured one of these little bones. And then that also led to something called sesamoiditis, which is just basically the inflammation of the tendon around that bone. And so what ended up happening was I was in a boot for a long period of time. I can't remember the exact amount of time, but it felt like forever. During this period of time, it was discovered that I had about a 3-inch leg length difference, which they thought at the time could have been one of the mechanisms that kind of predisposed me to this. So I went through rehab. I did all that stuff, still trying to kind of earn that contract. Ended up getting orthotics, going through the rehab process, came back probably too soon. And then was in this kind of cycle of rehab, trying to train, trying to get back, rehab, trying to train. And I never really, during this period of time, had someone guided me physically, what I needed to do from a conditioning standpoint, what I needed to do from a strength and power standpoint. And so a lot of the things that I did probably caused me more harm than they did good. And so there was also a guy on the team that I was playing for who was an older pro who had the same condition as me, and he'd actually had the sesamoid bone removed, and he was still having a lot of problems with that. So that didn't really give me a ton of confidence going into that situation and maybe getting it surgically removed. And so what ended up happening was eventually I got to a point where I needed to make a decision. And so the decision was that I would just get these cortisone injections in between the kind of the bone and the ball of my big toe. And that gave me kind of 4 to 6 weeks of pain-free soccer. And so I probably had 8 or 10 of these over the next number of years while I'll get there in a minute, but transitioned to college soccer as well. So obviously the soccer situation in England didn't pan out. I think I was 19, and I had an opportunity to put together a DVD of clips of myself playing. And then I did like a mass marketing kind of email, made it specific to everyone, almost like a job interview email sort of thing that I would do now, you know. And so I'm pretty computer savvy, so I like edited the video myself, and it looked really good for what it was. Put it on a CD, sent it to a bunch of different colleges. I'd always had an affinity with coming to America and trying to live in America or just be here for a prolonged period of time. So college in America seemed perfect. And also because when I left school at 16, I didn't have anything to fall back on. I was basically, you're going to become a professional soccer player and you're going to give everything to that. And I had nothing else. And that's a different conversation, but that also creates a ton of problems within kind of the English soccer system as well. Because I've had a couple friends who have been in that same situation and have lost everything due to injury or not having something to fall back on. So I was really lucky in the fact that I had an opportunity, and I had my mum and dad who were very supportive in me coming to America, and my family and my friends. And so ended up getting an offer from Long Island University in Brooklyn in New York. I just spent the previous year in New York City. And so I was like, right, New York's fantastic. Love it. It's going to be great. It was a Division I program. And I kind of had that, like the blinders on, you only want to play Division I, everything else is kind of subpar. And so, which you'll find out later on, that wasn't the case either. So I end up coming out to New York City. I'm a computer science major. I love living in New York City because it's the best city in the world, and there's just stuff going on all the time. Music, concerts, whatever, it's happening. The soccer wasn't great. We played on a really, really hard concrete, like old AstroTurf field, which caused me a lot more problems with my hips. Like I was a goalkeeper, so I'd hit the ground, blow my hips out. Like bursitis in my hips, things like that. Things that you can't really train around because it's just so, being a goalkeeper, you hit the ground a lot. It's so like fundamental to your position. So that then kind of opened my mind to a lot of different things: hip mobility, training, getting under a squat rack, which we'd never really had in strength and conditioning in England because that piece was kind of non-existent. So from there, I'm a computer science major. I'm spending all my time sitting behind the computer, and I'm miserable in my classes. I don't feel like I'm learning. I'm pretty computer savvy, but just sitting there coding is really difficult for me. And so I end up doing about 18 months in New York City. 1 year after I come to America, one of my best friends from England comes out to Midwestern State in Wichita Falls in Texas, starts playing there, is loving it. I'm obviously in New York City, a little bit disillusioned, unhappy with my soccer. I want to play on grass. That's a big thing for me. It's a big thing for the English. Just, it's different, right? Especially as a keeper. I go down to visit my mate I think it was like full break. We had some time off. So I go down to visit him, and I get there and the place is just buzzing. They've got like 3,000 or 4,000 people in the stands at a Division II soccer game. And so long story short, I end up transferring down to Midwestern State that Christmas. So I'm like, right, this is it for me. I want to come and play here. Obviously the whole Division I, Division II program thing, I was completely wrong. I got to Midwestern. The facilities were great. We had really solid coaches. I think my head coach, he retired a few years ago, but he's still, if he was coaching, would be like the most winning Division II soccer coach of all time. We had athletes from all over the place, Brazil, England, America, everywhere. And we played some really good football. And it was just good fun. It was just really good fun. And so that was great. But more importantly, I then kind of fell in love with the physical development piece. And so computer science wasn't offered at Midwestern. And so I kind of fell into this choice of what do I want to do next? And so I can't remember what I declared for, but I had a couple classes in like kinesiology. And so Dr. Wyatt, his name is, he's still at Midwestern. Basically what happened was I did a couple of his classes and I was like, right, this is for me. I want to pursue this and kind of turn this into physical preparation of some sort. And so ended up finishing my undergraduate degree in 2011. From there, I stayed on as a graduate assistant, and I was kind of going between a GA for the soccer team and a GA in the weight room, but also getting my master's in exercise physiology. And at that point, Dr. Wyatt was a big time mentor for me. But then also we had a new member of staff join called, his name is Dr. Jason Winchester, and he's now a professor at Incarnate Word in San Antonio. And we just had a really great group of students who we were sponges. We would do a lot of learning off of one another. Dr. Winchester was very heavily on the strength and power side of things. Dr. Wyatt was very heavily on the conditioning endurance side of things. He was a road cyclist. And so we would just have these debates about how to better train athletes and just seeing kind of different sides of the coin, different perspectives and things like that. And that really led to developing the passion that I have for strength and conditioning today. And so I didn't finish my master's at Midwestern. That's like one of the only regrets I have in my life. I finished like all up to my thesis, finished all the classes. TCU is the closest Division I school to Midwestern. It's like 110 miles away. I was like, right, I'm going to go perform an internship at TCU. One of the guys I was working with at the time had been in the program, spoke very highly of Zach and his internship program. So I applied for the internship, got the internship, came here in 2013, I believe, in like August 2013, right before fall camp, was thrown in the deep end, stayed as an intern for a year. Then like timing is everything. And sometimes things just work out, right? So I went from being an intern to then a graduate assistant position came available at TCU, applied for it. With that then meant I could then stay in the country longer with my visa. Ended up going through that process. Right at the end of my GA position at TCU, a full-time position at TCU came open. Ended up interviewing for that process, got the job. At the same time, met my wife. And then that was fall 2016, graduated in May 2017 with my master's. And then that's kind of where I am today, like three years later, and I've been in the country for, I think this is my 14th year now. And so I currently work with men's golf, women's golf, swimming and diving, and then I oversee the technology with indoor volleyball and beach volleyball.
Yeah, beach volleyball. There we go.
Yeah, and as you can see, like I can talk about anything, and I think that's a downfall of the British, is that we can just talk and talk and talk. But the big thing for me was that I had great coaches working around me for my skill, for my technical and my tactical stuff. I had great coaches working around me. So like my physiotherapists were fantastic. My PT, everything on that kind of rehab side were great. But when I needed it the most, I never had someone who could take me from that rehab setting through to the performance setting, if that makes sense. There was no one to link you're finishing with rehab here. You need to be able to check these boxes to optimize your performance. And so that was left up to me. I made a lot of mistakes. I learned a lot from that. I failed more than I succeeded. And like, while I was going through this, I was always kind of asking myself questions and being like like a performance coach in my head without being a performance coach. So kind of an example of that is, I'm a goalkeeper. It's very much a power sport. It's very much a repeated power sport. You don't need a ton of specific conditioning. As a goalkeeper in England, we would go and do all of the conditioning that the field players would do. And then we would go and perform our goalkeeper specific skill. Okay. And so this question, I hated running. Everyone hates running in soccer. It's just not fun, right? If you do, you're twisted in the head. The bioenergetics of a goalkeeper versus a field player are completely different. So we were performing all the bioenergetic stuff of the field players, then going and being expected to perform high concentration, high focus, decision-making goalkeeper drills under a ton of fatigue, under a ton of lactate, and then expected to get better when we weren't really training specific energy systems to be better goalkeepers. And so that's one of the reasons why I became a strength and conditioning coach, because I thought, and I wanted to look at and kind of investigate, how can we optimize this? How can I give athletes information and knowledge that that I didn't have when I was going through something difficult, to them, even like little tidbits of information? How can I help them not fail the way that I failed, if that makes sense? Because I fully believe that if I had better kind of guidance during those periods of time, there's a good chance I'd still be playing soccer at a pretty good level right now. Goalkeepers don't get into their prime until they're kind of mid-30s or early 30s, mid-30s. And that's kind of where I'm at right now.
So I'll try to do a little bit of summarizing and then ask a few more questions, and then we'll get on to the main ones. And it's funny how everyone kind of gets into the field. It's either like you didn't have a coach and you want to fill that gap. You had a super good like performance coach and they inspired you, or you had a really bad one and you kind of just want to like right their wrongs in a positive way. So it's interesting how everyone's kind of path leads them down this or to this field. But I can only imagine what those decisions must have been like, leaving school as a 16-year-old and then deciding to come to the States. But I guess my two questions off of that so one off of that would be, does that help you connect with some of the international athletes at TCU? Because I know TCU has a decent amount. And then my second one about TCU, because you work with a lot of teams, and I know that you do a lot of creating these opportunities for yourself or kind of seeking them out. So if you could just chat on your experiences as being international, like an international coach, or you know what I'm trying to say, with
Sure.
international student athletes, and then also like how you're maximizing your time at TCU.
So I don't know if it creates buy-in. I obviously didn't play soccer at the pinnacle. I didn't ever compete in the first team or anything like that. So I have experience of being around these professional teams. I wouldn't necessarily say that helps me work with a swimmer or with a golfer, because I'm not specific to their sport. If I was working with soccer, it might give me a little bit more of a kind of a leg up, so to speak. But I have a lot of insight because of the situations that I've been in. And those situations have allowed me to kind of guide my process. Like, for example, I've had coaches who the way that they thought that they should communicate is just berating you and just being like almost nasty to you, right? And I saw how athletes and my teammates would respond to that. And it was never positive. And if it was positive, it was, okay, I'm going to prove you wrong sort of thing. And I just don't think that the coach-athlete relationship should go that route. I'm a very small piece of the puzzle. Everything that I do should facilitate you feeling better, moving better, and performing your sport better. And I don't think that making someone feel small, that shouldn't be on the same page, you know. I think that kind of answers your question. Yeah. For this, what was the second one again?
Maximizing / creating new opportunities for yourself at TCU with other teams.
So yeah, I try, and we've got a good staff at TCU. We get involved with a lot of different things, conferences and continuing professional development wise. We do a lot of collaboration within the department. We do a lot of collaboration with sports medicine, which I think is important. And like you said, that those opportunities and the ability to collaborate and kind of make it really interdisciplinary, that doesn't come by chance. You have to work to create those opportunities and communicate. Like, I'm extremely transparent with my programming. I'm extremely transparent with what I'm trying to achieve in the weight room. If that doesn't coincide with what, let's say, an athletic trainer believes in, then somewhere something's gone wrong. We need to make sure we're communicating and we're on the same page with that. I'm also lucky that I've been here through an internship, a graduate assistantship, and a full-time position. So there's very few teams, if any, that I haven't worked with, and coaches that I haven't worked with. And so for example, I was working with equestrian athletes when I was a graduate assistant, had a great time working with them. And they wanted to train and they wanted to get better and they wanted to be able to do some of the movements that some of the athletes were doing. And they, big picture, they wanted to be treated like athletes. And so we learned how to squat. We learned how to do a pull-up. We learned how to do a push-up. If when they leave after 4 years of education at TCU, if they can go to an LA Fitness or a big box gym and write their own program or understand, okay, right, I want to squat today, this is a good idea, then that's successful in my eyes. My kind of path is very interesting because I've only ever been at 2 schools in the US as a strength coach, but I've worked with a ton of different sport coaches, athletes, and strength coaches as well. And just being as transparent as possible is massive. There's no place for ego.
Fantastic. And then last thing before we get into the main questions is your 5-year plan, and just chatting about just the planning process. You have to understand the why. You have to be very clear on your goal. So if you could just chat just very briefly about that, because that's becoming more popular nowadays. People are utilizing the resources outside of the confines of a pro sports team or a private facility or a university. So kind of a little bit about just that whole process that you've been going through with your plan.
Sure. So obviously with COVID and that situation, right, having a pivot or having something to be able to create multiple streams of income is huge. And so I'm not really at the point of like broadcasting and marketing that right now, but my kind of 5-year plan is that I want to be working with professional golfers, youth golfers, amateur golfers, elderly golfers who are trying to increase their golf performance, but then also increase their general fitness. And I believe that strength and conditioning is a huge piece for this, and can absolutely, you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak. And so I kind of created Michael Wood Performance because I see myself doing that in the next 5 years, where I have this system in place where I'm helping a ton of different golfers from a bunch of different backgrounds who are using education and knowledge that I've developed working with my athletes to further themselves as athletes in their general life, and then as athletes on the golf course as well. And so obviously COVID has created a not necessarily job security issue, but I think we all have to think about things a little bit differently as well. Obviously, my number one priority is, as long as I'm employed at TCU, going to be my TCU athletes. But I have to think in the back of my mind, like if things do go poorly and a furlough happens or something like that, I need to be able to pivot as quickly as I can, get something else out there, and make sure that my bills are getting paid. You know, like obviously I've got mortgage, things like that. I can't let that stuff slide. And also I think that I've fallen into the golf situation, right? When I became full-time, I started as the women's golf strength and conditioning coach. And the 3.5 years that I have been working with them has been fantastic. The coaches are brilliant. The athletes are awesome. They buy in. We were able to, the first semester, make it really objective to see how strength and conditioning can help you. And so we do a lot of objective stuff with like looking at club head speed and making sure that what we are doing is influencing club head speed in addition to more traditional strength and conditioning as well. There's a big misconception in golf strength and conditioning. I think that what you do in the weight room has to look like the swing. And that's not necessarily true, because the foundation of some of these golfers is very, very underdeveloped, to the point where some subtle changes here and there and some very basic strength and conditioning, like developing lower body strength or single leg strength or stability, things like that, can massively increase your ability to put force into the ground and ultimately swing the club faster. And so when that process is a little bit more objective and we have ways to measure that, athletes buy in so quickly. And we're not training for fluff, we're training for golf performance. And almost in a similar way that I mentioned with the equestrian athletes, like the golfers are athletes as well. If you treat an athlete like they're going to break, they're probably going to break. If I train and treat my athletes like athletes, there's a good chance they're going to get stronger, more powerful, more athletic, and then that's going to transition and transfer to the sport.
Fantastic. I love that. If you think that they might break, then you're going to train them to be breakable for sure. And with my last remark, and then we'll get into the big questions, is of course taking care of your responsibilities in front of you, but having that kind of long-term plan, or just more things to market yourself as a professional, keep developing yourself as a professional, whatever I'm trying to say. But it's super easy to get caught in the box. This is currently what I'm working through with my mentors. Like, what am I doing now? What can I be doing? And then how can I maximize and kind of bridge that gap? So kind of thinking outside the box and being realistic that, like, of course the pandemic doesn't happen every year or every other year. Hopefully it doesn't, and hopefully it goes away soon. But to have those options and to utilize your resources beyond kind of this box that you see yourself in, because someone with a CSCS experience and a degree can do a ton of things, so kind of just getting creative, thinking long-term, but taking care of your responsibilities and trying to put that all together. So that's awesome to where it's led you now. And what is the coolest story you have thus far in your career?
I don't know how related it is to strength and conditioning.
It's quite all right.
So in 2014, obviously I was a graduate assistant, and TCU football was really, really successful. Like, we were on fire, and just kind of being part of that and kind of assisting the staff and assisting the athletes during that period of time, that was probably from a sporting kind of involvement standpoint, the best 6 months of my life, because this place was on fire. Like, the campus was buzzing. We're really lucky that we have such a small enrollment, just over 10,000 students, that it's a really small school feel. But obviously big picture, like we were so close to making the college football playoffs that year, and we were just on fire. Like we were running through teams, and it was really good fun to be a part of and watch. And I think it also kind of ties back into my soccer team. We have a saying called "No one likes us, we don't care," and it was great because our success infuriated people, because we're not supposed to be successful, because we're a smaller school and we're competing against some of the biggest schools in the country. And the fact that we just were going out there and just tearing teams apart, that was really, really good to be a part of from an athletics department standpoint. And then obviously finishing with the Peach Bowl win in January or New Year's. My little brother came over for that, and we celebrated New Year's Eve together, and it was just a really cool kind of ending to that period of time.
I can only imagine what that buzz, just being on that campus myself, and just even the 2 years that I've been there, we had a decent amount of success, and like there's definitely a buzz, a hype just on game day. So I can only imagine what that was like with all the success.
Kind of a second like coolest story is seeing strength coaches who come through the internship program like I did. It's run by Zach Dakin, who does a fantastic job. Then seeing the waves that they're making in the industry as well. Seeing them go on to be graduate assistants, go on to be full-time strength and conditioning coaches and head strength and conditioning coaches is really, really cool to see as well. And like I've got a lot of good relationships with a lot of our former interns, and it's great. We've got like a TCU internship kind of family tree going, where it's just a really interesting situation where a lot of coaches come through this internship program and go on to really good things and great things. And catching up with them and kind of communicating them and picking their brains and them communicating back to me and asking me questions and I'm asking them questions. It's awesome. And that transparency and that learning is really positive for the industry. Like I said, no egos, kind of just chatting it up, brainstorming, talking shop.
Exactly. Talking shop on the Talking Shop podcast. Look at that. So next question, what is the story most fundamental leading you to now?
It's got to be learning from my mistakes and taking things that I did incorrectly or suboptimally and not necessarily twisting, but maybe optimizing that system, right? So I didn't realize at the time when I was in high school, and so the English system is you do something called GCSEs, which is basically like I don't know if it equates to the GED, but maybe. I was doing like a physical education GCSE, right? And my teacher at the time was a guy called David Palmer, and I never thought that this was going to be my career. I never thought that PE or strength and conditioning or kinesiology was ever going to be something I would do long term. But I had such a good time and I enjoyed that class so much that now looking back, it makes a lot of sense. And so kind of taking that and then trying to apply that to my thought process of my training, failing a lot, but then also having really good mentors to look up to and not be afraid to tell me that I'm wrong or tell me that there's a better way of doing something. Because a lot of what we do, right, is some of it's subjective, but a lot of it's not black and white. A lot of it's kind of gray area, like this might help, this might not help. So kind of having someone to critically talk to you about something, but obviously not put you down and have a critical conversation was really, really powerful for me. So I owe a lot to my mentors in my undergrad and graduate school in Dr. Frank Wyatt and Dr. Jason Winchester. I don't think I let them know that enough, just because of the different conversations that we had and how to apply peer-reviewed research to strength and conditioning. And I understand that that's not like the be-all and end-all, but that's a really good starting place. One of my earliest soccer coaches in my youth said something pretty profound to me that I didn't really think about until years later, and that was that a good coach is a good thief. So if you have the ability to look at something analytically or critically and think that that's going to positively increase something, or a drill that works really well, then steal it and use it, make it your own. Um, that was huge for me in my development. And then the last piece is the TCU internship that I did, that I got my feet wet, kind of teaching a lot of different athletes on a lot of different teams. That kind of took everything that had been almost bottled up in me, from the mistakes that I made through to like the early education stuff that I did, through to the information that we kind of developed in graduate school. All of a sudden I had a platform that I could really start to make change and start applying that. And that wouldn't have happened without the internship and graduate assistantship at TCU, kind of getting thrown in at the deep end, coaching, learning on my feet. And we talk about soft skills a lot and things like that. But I think that one of the best soft skills you can get out there and learn is go on site, go watch other coaches coach, see how they handle the room, see how they interact individually with an athlete when they have 35, 40 athletes training at the same time. How does a coach connect with their athletes? That's massive.
Fantastic. And it's a combination of having those opportunities to be thrown in the deep end, because I'm sure there's some internships out there where you're just wiping benches down the whole time, so it's a combination of having those hands-on experiences, but also having those people to bump you in the right direction in a productive manner, not in a condescending manner. So sure. It takes a village to raise a kid, or however that phrase goes. But the longer I'm in this field, like, it takes a village to make a good S&C practitioner, in my opinion. So it's a combination of knowing that you just got to go and do, knowing that you are going to fail, but getting the most out of those failures, and kind of leaning on those above you, and then leaning on yourself just to pick yourself back up and know that you are making progress and all of that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And then the last point you brought up, I'm going to leave that because I want to bring that back up at the end, kind of an allusion to the action steps. So I'll hook the listeners in to listen to the end. So last big story, what is the story you're most proud? Yeah, story you're most proud of.
I kind of have two. Sweet. And one is like the immigration process and being able to kind of get out of England and get to America and do that process, and the support that my family gave me and things like that. Like that whole process, like I got my green card almost a year ago. Like that was pretty fantastic. That was awesome. I'm probably the most proud of that, because that was a lot of blood, sweat and tears, especially with like periods of time of like unknowing and things like that. And it was just so much relief when I finally got my green card, right? But then I think that the second thing that I'm most proud of is the relationship with my athletes at TCU. We're a small piece of the puzzle. Everything that we do should facilitate enhanced performance, right? I understand that the percentage of my athletes who turn professional is very small. So just being able to have a conversation with an athlete, ask how they're doing, then impart some information that they can use for the next 40, 50, 60 years of their life, of how to train well. What is a good squat? What is a good movement? How can I sequence these things together to make me feel better? I think that's really powerful. Like I said, I don't want any of my athletes to go into a big box gym and feel intimidated by the situation. I think that the relationship piece, we talk about it a lot, but if you don't have a relationship and you don't have trust with an athlete, then the best program in the world is not going to be useful. And so by treating my athletes and like humans, having conversation with them, but then also understanding that when we're working, and we can kind of flip that switch, so to speak, so that we're not wasting time and we can get the most out of the time we spend in the weight room, on field, on court. I think is really powerful. And I don't think it's something that is that difficult to do. You just have to spend time conversing with your athletes, talking to them and treating them like people. Kind of comes back to the, like, I treat people the way that I want to be treated. I respect them. I think that I'm extremely lucky with the situation that I'm in and the level of athlete that I get to work with, and I don't take that for granted. And I certainly don't treat any athlete different to another athlete based on their performance level or anything like that. Just treating them like humans first, showing them that, yeah, I do actually care about you and that I'm here to help you and facilitate you to become a better athlete.
And that's one thing that I always noticed whenever we had some of our office talks is we always kind of got bombarded / interrupted, people just popping in and saying hello. And it was cool to see you kind of do your thing, not on the floor, and kind of not with that. You still had your coach hat on, but it was just like a different coach hat, So
Sure.
it's cool to see the relationships you have with your athletes, but also the ones that aren't specifically your athletes that you might have had in the past, or maybe you haven't even had at all, but just because, you're always out there, et cetera, et cetera. So that was always fun to watch. And it's interesting when you kind of take a step back, when you talk about flipping the switch. Like, if you want the switch to be flipped on to be really good when you're training, well, then you got to put some time in for when the switch is flipped off, and how they can both go together, and you can't have one without the other, right? You can't have the awesome program and the awesome buy-in without those conversations and with the switch flipped off. So kind of just taking a step back, and it's like, why are we really here? What percentage of your athletes go pro? And just some kind of thoughts like that, where it can be so easy to get caught up in the X's and O's, but it's like, well, are you training a piece of paper or are you training a person? Kind of just taking that step back, like I said. So very cool for sure. And like I said, it's been fun to watch you do your thing, and that you've learned throughout the years. So
Still make mistakes as well. Don't get me wrong. Like, I speak with Zach about this all the time. Like, I suffer from imposter syndrome massively. I'm always second guessing what I'm trying to do. And I think that having that kind of on my shoulder talking to me drives me on to learn more, to get out of my comfort zone and communicate more with coaches and try and develop myself. There's some days where it's brutal, but I really think that having that kind of not inadequacy, but having that kind of that imposter kind of, like, you're not a fraud, but sort of, kind of that drives me to be a better coach. That drives me to be a better strength and conditioning coach, drives me to be a better person, and fuels the fire that I don't want to find a comfort zone,
And with the failing always being a part of the process, where with experience, you just get a more efficient failing learning curve process cycle, and
yeah.
And I forgot, I think it's when I first started coaching, I was like, I'm gonna make the best programs. I'm gonna know what to say all the time and all this kind of stuff. When it's really just, instead of taking me a week to figure out, like, dang, what was I thinking? It's that turnover of do, reflect, correct, just becomes that much kind of quicker as time goes on.
You hide it a lot better as well.
Yes, and you're more effective at doing that as well.
So when I was early on the floor, right, obviously accent, saying things differently, people not understanding what I'm trying to say or communicate, I got a lot better at that. That was a huge piece for me. Stupid things like, there was one situation when I must have been an intern at the time, because I was working with diving. It must have been like 2013, right? And I'm asking them to do like a 2-second isometric in a rowing move, a pull and row move, right? And I said, right, okay, I want you to pause at the board, like PAUSE. And they just kept rolling through and there was no pause. And then so I was like, hey, like, what do you think I'm asking you to do? And they thought that I was saying pause, PAWS, as in, like, just get your hands to the board and that's fine. But I was actually asking them to get a hold for 2 seconds. So I don't use the word pause as much in my programming anymore. I change what I'm the message. Well, the message is the same. I'm trying to change the way that I communicate it, because I don't want misinformation. I don't want them to not hear what I'm trying to say, you know?
And those are the kind of things that even I'm experiencing coaching myself, where it's like I'll beat myself up for it, and I'm like, gosh, like, why didn't I know better? And then I'll take a step back, and it's like, where would I have learned that otherwise? You know? So kind of like I said, having that holistic approach of taking a step back, understanding that it is a forever growing and learning process. And like if someone walked in, you know, first day of your internship, and they said, Woody, don't say pause, say hold, because they can't understand you, you'd be what what are you talking about? You know, you've never even
Yeah,
seen me do my thing. So it's understand that, yes, it is a process, and you got to be hard on yourself. But like I said, there's things that you're only going to learn by going and doing.
absolutely.
So I think that brings us, that's a nice segue into what are 1 to 3 actionable things the listener can start doing tomorrow to become better, which we kind of alluded to on and off for the past.
So I've got 4. I hope that doesn't break any rules.
I'll make an exception.
But the first one is to start the learning process, right? This is a positive and a negative, because there is so much information out there, and there is so much kind of rhetoric and conversation around the information. If you look on Twitter, there's 50% of people saying, oh, this is positive. There's 50% of people saying it's negative. So everything you do from the learning process, you have to do critically, and you have to kind of take a step back and analyze it and ask yourself the question, is this going to help me? Is this going to help my athletes? Is this going to help my coaches, right? Example, there's a service out there called Strength Coach Network that is so much information. It's fantastic. Really, really good practitioners, strength and conditioning coaches, performance coaches from around the world, tons of different sports, talking about topics that are really interesting. So try and find information that is from people who have already applied the information, I think is a huge piece, and applied the information well. Like I said, is this going to help me? Is this going to help me coach? Is this going to help me progress my athletes? Is this going to help my athletes? Is it progressive? Is it necessary? Is it specific? So I think that's the first piece, right? I think if you're not reading books related to strength and conditioning, but then also kind of trying to get away from it as well, and just kind of general life development books, I think is really important. That's my first piece.
And then I'll comment that before you go on to the second one.
All right.
And having those like critical thoughts, or like critical learning, if that's what we want to call it, where it's, what's the point of, like, first off, does it make sense? Have they applied it? So did they really get it? And then how does this apply to my situation? You know, why would I spend all my time reading articles about these super advanced, crazy periodization schemes, when right now I'm working with 9 to 11 middle school and high school, you know?
Sure.
And then just kind of different things like that. So where it's like, what does this mean to me as I do my job? And then conversely, on the other side, with the books you read, one example I tweeted out a little bit ago that was pretty well received by my audience, shout out listener, was basically, after you finish a book, make it into 3 to 5 action steps, kind of like what I do with my podcasts, where it's like, if we consume this content to make us better practitioners, well, do we know how it's going to make us better at practicing our job? So whether it's just making like a little book club, I don't know, talking with a colleague or whatever it may be, or just things like this, education, I believe, should be tied into action at the end of the day, is the moral of my story.
Absolutely. And that goes with everything. If it's not helping you make decisions, then are you wasting your time, you know? And I think there's also the the opposite of that as well. Like I've learned, excuse me, I've learned just as much from people doing things poorly or suboptimally, and as I have from people who've done things really well. And that's just part of the development process. There's a lot of really, really smart people out there doing things that are a lot more intense, like you said, than what my athletes need right now.
Fantastic. And what's the second one?
Second one is to reach out, talk to coaches, and go and watch training sessions occur. There are a lot of things and aspects to organizing a training session that you're just not going to be able to get from reading a book, reading an article, or like watching video. Make sure that you are getting out and watching as many different coaches do their thing, to learn and develop how they hold the room individually, how they're talking to athletes. A big piece is if an athlete has a restriction or a modification, how does that coach make a modification or a workaround, so to speak, or something that athlete can do and get better at, whilst making sure that the rest of the 30 athletes in the room are still on task. And we're lucky that we have several interns here that can help with that process. But I know for a fact there's a lot of other very good strength and conditioning coaches who just rely on themselves solely to do that. And so getting out there and watching them do their thing. In the high school level, there's a ton of very, very good strength coaches. Go and watch a high school group, because you're going to get just as much from watching those coaches coach and those athletes train as you will going and watching a big time Power 5 school train. Because at the end of the day, the principles are the same, and we are trying to develop the same things, just completely different environments. And it's important to get out there and kind of see different perspectives. This also kind of falls under this topic. Is I see a lot of interns now kind of using social media to their advantage, right? If you're able to take good information from literature, from anecdotal evidence, from other practitioners and apply it, but then also kind of make posts about it, you're basically building a digital resume with that. So we've had a couple come through in the past few semesters that have done a really good job of not just putting their training program into play, but kind of putting some rationale as well behind that. And I think that is a very good way to get your foot in the door, get conversations started, in comparison to not having that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that could be a whole nother podcast in and of itself, the digital resume that you have complete control over, and how do you utilize your current situation, similar to when we talked about the 5-year plan. How do we utilize where we currently are now and not putting ourselves in a box?
Yep.
To help us to where we want to go, while obviously taking care of our priorities, but how can we use that to the best of our ability in the moment and also kind of in the future? So was that your number 3? Or
that was 2. That was 2,
more.
but that was a 2-part 2. This is number 3. Keep it simple. So the basics are never defeated. You can't optimize a system that does not have a solid foundation. I can't remember where I read that recently, but that really stuck out to me. Take your time to progress movements. Make sure your movement patterns are clean and efficient first, and then you can obviously add load much quicker, and you're going to develop strength more specific to the movement pattern. Zach's book, Movement Over Maxis, is great with this. It's a little plug to him as well. What his book does is basically condenses the whole internship program that he's devised at TCU, but it's specific to baseball. But the methods in the book are very applicable to every sport, basically. Very much a movement pattern, developing motor control, and then progressing from there. So I always come back to a more basic program than I do a more intense and progress program, especially now with COVID. So we're going through like a patterning block right now, trying to reintroduce movement patterns, because we almost have to assume that our athletes did nothing over quarantine. I don't want to bring them back to a situation where we're failing on week 1 because of the intensity or volume's too great. And so making sure that the stimulus that we're applying is adequate, and they're honestly moving better and feeling better when they leave. That's my goal for these first couple of weeks. And keeping it simple always comes back to the forefront.
I will put that book in the show notes, and I've really enjoyed my chats with Zach whenever he and I had the opportunity to talk. And
Absolutely.
he's doing a lot of really good stuff, and he puts out a lot of really good content.
Yeah, he's killing it.
Yeah, he is killing it. I'm slowly watching his follower count go up and up and up. So
I'll see if he wants to get on here.
fantastic. Yeah. That'd be awesome. And then what's number 4?
The last one is a little bit more to do with programming, but if we're not asking good questions as strength and conditioning coaches, I think we're missing the boat. And by good questions, I mean, what is the athlete doing in a sport-specific training session? What are the demands of the training session? What does the sport coach's training session look like? What are the demands of the athlete's competition? So part of what we have to do is make sure that we're filling in gaps of what the athlete is doing in practice versus what the athlete needs to do in a game. How can we facilitate the elevated performance in the game by making sure that there aren't things that are missing from the programming, right? If you watch film, watch practice, watch game film, you can sit there with a stopwatch, you can look at work to rest ratios, you can look at changes of direction, high speed running, things like that. All of this stuff is free. You don't need Catapult GPS or heart rate monitors to look at that stuff, right? So that the more you watch the film, or the more you watch film and competition, you're going to understand the demands, the energetics, the bioenergetics of the sport. You're going to understand what is happening in the game that you can then reverse engineer your programming to try and achieve that, right? I'm going to finish with a quote: without data, you're just another person with an opinion. So whenever possible, like, we're lucky that we use some technologies to try and drive decision making. I'm not going to sit here and say that just by having technology allows us to reduce injuries to zero. That's not why we use technology. But what it does do is it allows us to kind of take a step back, objectively look at practice, objectively look at a game, and see if we are missing anything from a intensity or a volume standpoint. And that's massive.
I remember seeing that opinion in your office, that quote in your office about that. And one kind of comment on that, I got this phrase from Dr. John Waggle with the Royals. He's on TSP 70. I think he'll be 73 if I'm not mistaken. And he says you have to be an elite question asker. Like, everyone wants to fill in, everyone wants to be the best like answer producer or the best hole filler, but they don't even know what the questions are. They don't even know what the holes are, So kind of something I've been saying a few times in this episode is like taking a step back, and it's like, well, if we're trying to get better at said sport, what does the sport look like for our team? If you're playing, I'll use a football example, American football. If you have more of an up-tempo offense, your work-to-rest ratio is probably going to be a little bit smaller, versus if you use the whole play clock and things like that. So you have your sport, but you have your team playing that sport, and then you have your athlete playing that sport at that school in that position, and there's all these different things that you have to ask questions about instead of just trying to fill that hole. Well, do you know what the hole fully looks like from all different angles first? So if you have any kind of closing remarks, or where can listeners get more of you, and we will call this a show?
I'm on Twitter and Instagram at MichaelWoody1. I don't put out a ton of content. I need to get better at that. It's something that I anticipate and I'm going to try and do better at the rest of this year, especially now that we're in a swing or in a pretty consistent schedule with everything that's going on. I don't have anything profound to finish with, unfortunately.
Awesome. It's just a matter of, one thing we talked about before we started recording is it's a matter of timing, and it's a matter of failing forward, and that kind of encapsulates your story. And I'd be more than happy to have you back on for round 2 so we can dive a little bit deeper. But, timing is everything, and you got to go do, experience, fail, learn, and kind of do it all over again. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to next time as well.
Cheers, mate.